Alright, hope everyone's doing wonderful today. Today what I got in store is I just want to make a video on the turn structure of turns in the card game Magic the Gathering. I just want to kind of go over the phases of each turn, kind of how the cards interact with them, what you can play when, what you can't play when, and just kind of go over some kind of real life battlefield examples of kind of how the turns work, how they flow, and just hopefully answer any questions you have of how the turn structure works in the card game Magic the Gathering. So there are 5 basic phases in each turn. You have the beginning phase, you have the pre-combat main phase, you have the combat phase, you have the post-combat main phase, and then you have the end phase. So there's 5 basic phases, and if you noticed, 2 of them are main phases. And in this card game, there's a bunch of different type of cards. I'm just going to show you an example of a couple of them. There's pretty much 7 card types. You have lands, and this includes any like non-basic lands or anything like that. As long as this says land on it, it is a land. So you have land cards, you have sorcery cards, you have enchantment cards, you have artifact cards, you have creature cards, you have instant cards, and you have planeswalker cards. And all of the cards have like their type in the middle left. You can just read the type. So like instant right there, you got a creature right here, and so on and so forth. So those are the basic type of cards, and some of the cards can only be played during certain times, and some of them can't be played during certain times. So I'm going to be explaining when and when can't you play certain cards as well. So I just want to give you that little advice before. So we're going to be starting with the beginning phase. The beginning phase has like kind of 3 parts inside of it. It has the untap phase, the upkeep, and then the draw. So during your untap phase, you're going to look on the board, you're going to say, do I have anything that I need to untap? Did I attack last turn? Did I have any mana tapped? This is when you're allowed to untap all of your stuff. You go ahead and untap it. Whatever you have tapped, you can go ahead and untap it unless something says you can't untap it. But this is when you're allowed to untap your stuff. During this phase, you can't really play anything. All you can do is just untap your stuff. After that, you have your upkeep phase. During your upkeep, there are some cards that interact with upkeep, and for example is like this one right here. It says at the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, transform Gustav Shepherd. So this card interacts with the upkeep. So once it's my upkeep turn or upkeep in my beginning phase, it interacts with this card. So look out for cards that interact with your upkeep step, because that is the part where it happens. It's right after your untap. It's untap, upkeep, draw, and that would be where this card comes into effect. And depending on what happened last turn, I'm able to transform him or not. So that's when my upkeep happens, and you're able to actually play some spells during your upkeep. You're able to play instant spells. Whenever you're priority, you're able to play the instant spells. You're also able to play spells with flash, which flash is you may cast a spell anytime you can cast an instant. So you're able to play instant spells and spells with flash. You're not allowed to play creatures. You're not allowed to play artifacts. You're not allowed to play enchantments. You're not allowed to play sorceries. You're not allowed to play land. And you're not allowed to play planeswalkers. But you are able to play instants if you so desire. And after my upkeeps, I have this card in the battlefield, for example. After my upkeep, I have my draw step. So this is when you actually draw a card. So untap, upkeep, draw. I draw the card, and I put it into my hand. And this saga right here actually comes into effect after my draw step. As the saga enters, and after you draw step, add a lore counter to it and sacrifice after 3. So this actually comes into effect after your draw step. So this comes into effect at your upkeep, and this comes into effect after your draw step. And if any cards interact with any of the steps, it's going to say it in the text as well. So if you just have like a basic creature on the battlefield, it's not really going to do anything during any of these steps as well. So I'm just showing examples of pretty much anything you can run into in the game. So that is the beginning phase. Your untap, where you untap all your stuff. Your upkeep, where you're able to play instants if you want, where you're able to use any abilities or anything that has to do with upkeep. If it says at the beginning of your upkeep, that's when that comes into effect. And then you have your draw step, where you're able to draw a card and put it into your hand. And after my draw step, since I do have a saga on the battlefield, that's when this comes into effect. You put a lore counter on it and go from there. Next, I have my pre-combat main phase. Main phases, the pre-combat main phase and the post-combat main phase, they're pretty much the same, just different sequencing, like one's before the other. But you can pretty much, they're pretty universal. You can play them, you can play the same cards in each of them, if that makes sense. During any of your main phases, you're allowed to put a land on the battlefield. You're only allowed to put one land on the battlefield per turn, unless it says elsewhere, but you're allowed to put one on your pre-combat main phase if I want. Or if I wanted to wait, I can put one on my post-combat main phase, but you're allowed to play land, you're allowed to play instants, you're allowed to play creatures, you're allowed to play artifacts, you're allowed to play enchantments, and you're allowed to play sorceries, and you're allowed to play planeswalkers if you want. So pretty much all of the spells in the game you can play during your main phase. It's your main phase, that's why they call it that. You're allowed to pretty much play anything. Also in this main phase, you're allowed to equip equipment. So if you have like equipment on the battlefield, it says attached to target creature you control equipped as a sorcery. And what it means equipped as a sorcery, it means equipped it when you can play a sorcery at sorcery speed. And sorcery speed in this game is you can play sorceries during your main phase. So you can only play, you can only equip equipment and play sorceries during your main phase. So that's what it means. During your main phase, you're allowed to equip that if you'd like. Planeswalkers as well. This is when you can activate their loyalty abilities if you'd like. During your main phases, you can either do in the pre-combat main phase or the post-combat main phase. You're only allowed to do it once each turn unless it's stated elsewhere, but you're allowed to. This is when you're going to be able to use the loyalty abilities on your Planeswalker as well. Just for example, I'm going to be showing this. I have like a Shivan Dragon right here. It has this ability, red. You pay red, gives it +1/+0 till end of turn. Abilities like this and cards that have abilities with like a tap symbol on it, that like a card that says like tap to deal 1 damage to a creature. You can use those abilities anytime you can play an instant. So if I wanted to do one during my upkeep, if I wanted to do one during my main phase, my combat phase, I can pretty much do them anytime you can legally do an instant. Just keep in mind, if it does have a card that says like tap to do 2 damage, you cannot tap it if it has summon sickness, so it has to be in the battlefield for at least a turn. But you can play any card abilities pretty much at instant speed unless it says otherwise, so just keep that in mind as well. So that's pretty much how the main phase works. You're allowed to play whatever spells you wanted to. So if I wanted to like Volcanic Hammer something or enchant something, whatever I wanted to, I'm allowed to do it during my main phase. So now we're on to the combat phase. And the combat phase is kind of like 4 sections, I would say, on the inside. And it has the beginning of combat. So at the beginning of combat, you're going to see if you have any cards that have anything to do with that. So actually I have one right here. It says at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you own both own and control Graph, Rat, and creature named Midnight Scavenger, exile them, then meld them into Chittering Host. So the ability doesn't really matter, but it just shows you that there are cards out there that have to do with at the beginning of combat. So right after your first main phase, it's at the beginning of your combat phase, that's when abilities like this come into play. So if I had both of them on the battlefield, I'd exile them and turn them into the super creature, but I don't. But it's just letting you know that there are certain cards out there that have to do with it at the beginning of combat on your turn. So just keep that in mind. So at the beginning of your combat, you're allowed to play instants. You're not allowed to play sorceries. You're not allowed to play enchantments. You're not allowed to play artifacts. You're not allowed to play creatures. You can play instants. You can't play lands. You can't play planeswalkers. You can play cards with flash if you want as well. And if you really wanted to, you can use abilities like this. So it's at the beginning of your combat. I don't have the creature, so I can't do anything. I don't really want to play an instance or anything like that. The next step in the combat phase is you're going to declare attacking or blocking. So if your opponent's attacking with something, you're going to declare the blockers. Let's say they're attacking with this giant worm. I'm going to declare that I'm blocking with this right here. So now it's declared. After you declare something, you're able to play any instance if you so want. So after I declare it, if I wanted to, I could go there and use a murder card to kill the worm if I so wanted to. Or vice versa. Let's say it's my turn and I'm attacking. I'm going to attack with these 3 creatures right here. I'm saying I'm going to attack with these 3 creatures right here. I'm declaring that. In response, do you want to do anything? Do you want to block? And they're going to either declare yes or no. And after that, you can play instant. So you're able to play instants. Your opponent can play instants as well after you declare blocking or attacking. So keep that in mind as well. So once I declare, my opponent, if they have like a murder card in their hand, they're able to murder one of my creatures if they so wanted to. So let's just say I'm going to attack with these. I'm declaring I'm attacking with these. They're going to declare their blockers. They're going to say, I don't like the rat. I'm going to block just the rat. So they're going to be blocking the rat. And the next step is combat damage is dealt. Combat damage is dealt as combat damage probably deserves its whole another video, but first strike damage deals first, double strike damage deals their damage first as well, but this is just regular damage. So obviously it is a 5/6 blocking a 2/1. I would deal 2 damage to the 6, bringing them down to 5/4, and they'd be dealing 5 damage to my 1, just killing the rat. So the combat damage is dealt. It kind of resolves. My rat goes into the graveyard. Their creature has a total of 5/4. So their toughness is going to stay a 4 until the end of the turn, because they were dealt damage. They don't get their health back or their toughness back until the end of the turn. So now their toughness is 5/4 until the end of the turn. Yeah, so that is the combat was dealt, and then it's the end of combat. And yeah, that's pretty much how the combat works. So you got the beginning of combat. You can play instants if you want there. You can, any cards that say the beginning of combat, that's when they come into effect. You can declare attackers or defenders. Once you declare them, you're able to play instants or cards with flash if you so wanted to. You're not allowed to play anything else. Then you have the combat damage is dealt, so the damage is dealt to the creatures if there's any damage dealt, or the players. And then it's the end of combat. And after the combat phase, it is the post-combat main phase, and pretty much like the first main phase, you're able to play anything you want. You can play a land if you haven't played one, you can play an instant, you can play a creature, you can play an artifact, you can play an enchantment, you can play a sorcery, you can use a planeswalker ability if you didn't use one, you can attach an equipment if you didn't use one. And then you can play sorceries, and I'm actually going to show this sorcery just for example because it's kind of wacky. It Seize the Day, 3 in a red, it's a sorcery. Untap target creature. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase, followed by additional main phase, and it does have flashback for 2 in a red. So what this card does, it actually changes the structure of your turn for that turn. It actually gives you an additional combat and additional main phase. So there are cards out there that do mess with the turn structure, but the cards will read out what it does. But most of the time, the turns are rock solid. Pretty much the 5 phases are basic, and the steps on the inside don't really change. But cards like this do exist, and they do change kind of the phases of the turn a bit. I just wanted to show that there for an example. So pretty much it is your second main phase, pretty much the same as the first one. Alright, and now we're on to the end step, the end phase. You got the end phase, and there's pretty much 2 parts inside of the end phase. You have the end step. The end step is pretty much if you have any cards that say something like this, like at the beginning of each end step, that's when they come into effect. So at the beginning of the end step, if a planeswalker enters the battlefield under your control, deals 2 damage to each opponent. So that's like when this card would come into effect. There's a whole bunch of cards out there that say like exile at the beginning of the end step, or something at the beginning of the end step. At the beginning of your end phase, your end step happens. That's when that card kind of triggers and happens. So it's the end step. You're also able to play instants during your end step. So if I really wanted to, I can play an instant, or I can play a card with flash. I can't play anything else. I can't play creatures, I can't play artifacts, I can't play enchantments, I can't play sorceries, and I can't play lands. So if I wanted to like murder one of my opponent's creatures during my end step, I could go for it. And I can't use any planeswalker abilities during your end step, and I can't use equipment during your end step or attach it. And then after that, it is the cleanup step. Pretty much damage is removed. You have, if you have more than 7 cards in your hand, you have to discard down to 7. So you choose which cards you don't want and discard down to 7. And then that's end of the turn kind of abilities wear off as well. So if you have a card like this, it says target creature gets +1/+1, gains trample till end of turn. During your cleanup step, this goes away. So during my cleanup step, damage is removed from the worm, so he's now back to a 5/6. I scrag the rag pits. Let's say I pumped up a creature. The creature is back down to its normal strength and toughness now. Yeah, so there's a whole lot of information right there. It's pretty much the 5 basic phases. You got the beginning phase, pre-combat main phase, combat phase, post-combat main phase, and end phase. Yeah, really a whole lot of information out there. I really hope that this video was helpful to some of you. I hope it makes sense. I hope it wasn't too just like all over the place, but I really wanted to try my best to just get a whole bunch of information out there to help people kind of understand how the turn sequencing works in this game. It's one of my favorite games, and I want to help new players learn it. But yeah, I just want to say thanks for stopping by. I really hope this video helped. Let me know if you have any questions. I do try my best to answer them. And just want to say thanks for stopping by. Keep on keeping on, and I'll catch you all in the next one.